All right, Committee of the Whole is reconvened. We are now on Speaker Terlahi's amendment. It's SB 55 TMT, line 22, page 8. Sure, SB 55 TMT L22 P8. Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on line 22, page 8, I'm making an amendment to subsection C of section 6, which is the Earned Income Tax Credits Reimbursements section of the bill. A says that 35 million of the EITC reimbursements goes to a certain place, the 21st Century Healthcare Center. B says 5 million of the EITC reimbursements goes to DOC funding. C says that any remaining balance will go into the Income Tax Refund Efficient Payment Trust Fund. So as you know, I've been trying to increase this, the amount of money that we're going to be depositing this fiscal year into this Income Tax Refund Efficient Payment Trust Fund because I don't believe it is enough. Of course, a lot of it depends on the timing of when we get the EITC reimbursements. Of course, if we get it in advance, that's fantastic. If we get it later, I want the Department of Administration to be able to cut checks for all processed returns without delay, without waiting for cash like they've done year after year. And so I thought this year, while we are getting EITC reimbursements in the millions of dollars, that we could set this money aside and take the reimbursements, put them all into the trust fund, and that way we can pay faster and we can catch up on payments from prior years that are still pending. So, but what my amendment would do on subsection C is ensure that the deposit is made, and in accordance with what the Director of Revenue and Taxation was talking about when she was here, they might receive these and be mandated pursuant to an agreement that she makes with them to put it into a separate trust fund like they have done with the child tax credits, or they're being directed to do with the child tax credits. So I just wanted to accommodate that they either put it into the Income Tax Refund Efficient Payment Trust Fund, already established by law, or into a separate federal trust fund if required by federal rules. So that's the language I'm adding. I'm also adding that this deposit shall be in addition to and shall not reduce the amounts set aside or deposited pursuant to the provision for tax refund payments set aside in the annual budget. So right now, we're only setting aside $74 million of general fund monies for tax refunds. We used to set aside 125. So we're setting aside 74. And I want this deposit for refunds to be in addition to that, and just make sure that in no way does it lessen the government of Guam's obligation to put $74 million of general fund revenues into that trust fund. So that's my amendment, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Anyone on this amendment? Senator Eitc, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I stand in full support of this amendment. It's just securing this additional excess revenue, not excess revenue, but additional funding from EITC that should be put away for tax refunds. I mean, if everyone thinks about EITC is tax refunds, that's what it's meant for. We're being reimbursed for tax refunds. So when this funding comes in, it should be in an account that only takes care of tax refunds. I mean, it makes complete sense to do so. So, Mr. Chair, I stand in full support of this amendment, particularly any remaining balance. That's basically what this is touching right here. It's any remaining balance from, letter A and B. I know there's some controversy with regards to A and B, but I think, this would at least provide that excess revenue from the EIETC to go into that direction. And I'm hoping maybe somebody might proffer an amendment for A and B to go directly into the tax credit or the income tax refund account. But for now, working on C, I stand in full support of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tadui. Anyone else on this amendment? Senator Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, if the OFB director can yield to the question, basically, is what does this provision do?
I believe your question, Senator Blas, is there any, what is the effect, or is there any negative effect with this amendment?
Yes.
The way it's written, sir, I don't foresee any problem with the amendment as written. The intent is to deposit all reimbursement money in excess of what we've already set aside to be deposited into the tax refund account. So, no, I don't see any problem with it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else on the Terlahi amendment? If no one else would like to speak on this amendment, Madam Speaker, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the support of my colleagues. I just want to point out that one of the previous speakers is correct, that subsection C really only describes about $15 million of EITC reimbursements, not the $55 million. And so while I'm trying to take care of this $15 million, make sure that it gets set aside no matter what, make sure that it doesn't lessen the provision of $74 million for tax refunds, I still don't believe that this adequately takes care of, the rest of the EITC, the $40 million of EITC that we, depending on the timing of when that reimbursement comes in. It's like we won't have it in advance to be paying it out. We won't have all of it until that entire reimbursement comes in. And we won't, without the reimbursement actually coming in, we will not have enough to pay off that, it was $23 million last week of processed yet unpaid tax liability. And that's what we still, I feel, have yet to address. We're not addressing that yet. And, but I would still appreciate support to pass this amendment to make sure that at least the $15 million is tied up in addition to the $74 million general fund.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Are there any objections to the amendment? No objections, motion carries. We are now on Amendment SB 55 TMT L8 P9.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a very similar amendment. This is for Section 7 of the bill, which is the child tax credit and additional child tax credit reimbursement section. It does the same thing. It adds language to the bill that says that it's either deposited into the income tax refund efficient payment trust fund or into a separate trust fund if required by federal rules. And so the Director of Revenue and Taxation has already told us that's what their agreement says right now. So Director Byrne said he is setting up a separate account, and that's where that child tax credit reimbursement money is going to be deposited in advance of payments. So this is very convenient for the government of Guam. We get the money, and then, we're required to make payments, so perfect. Yeah, there's only an issue if we're getting the money after we are required to make payments, and we don't have enough cash to make that payment fast enough. And so the second sentence that I'm adding to this section is that this is in addition to and shall not reduce the amounts set aside or deposited pursuant to the provision for tax refund payments set aside in the annual budget. That's the $74 million. That's the amount we're setting aside for all other taxpayers and to cover prior years and to cover earned income tax if we don't get that in advance as well. So I would ask for support on this amendment as well, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you just point out again what this amendment is? What number?
Section 7, subsection A, it's number L8P9. TMT L8, line 8, page 9.
Can you put the number, what is the number on the Google Drive? What's the number of the amendment on the Google Drive?
Number 11 on the drive.
Okay, yes, it's number 11 on the drive. Again, it's SB 55 TMT to line 8, page 9. Anyone on the amendment? Senator Bloss, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I don't know if the author of the amendment could yield to a question on, it basically says, into a separate trust fund if required by rules, and then makes reference to an income tax refund efficient payment trust fund. If it is, that's one and the same, or is that a different fund?
Speaker, do you yield to the question?
Sure. Current law talks about the interest, how it will, if the income tax refund efficient payment trust fund earns interest, how it will be used. But because this amendment is also allowing it to go to a different separate trust fund, it's just making it very clear that the interest we're talking about is on the income tax refund efficient payment trust fund. The interest on a separate trust fund, I am sure will be controlled by the agreement with the IRS or Treasury.
Senator Bloss, does that satisfy the question?
I understand and I agree. I just want to make sure that the language is tighter, obviously. You know, it appears like you're talking about two separate provisions here. And there may be, I just don't want it to be confused, because now we are talking about two different funds. Right? Ma'am, I agree with you. I just want to make sure that it's tight. Because it's easy to assume that the fund that you're talking about, the trust fund you're talking about, is the income tax refund efficient payment trust fund. Mr. Chair, can we take a couple minutes recess so that we can fix this?
Moment's recess. Senator Blas, we're back from a short recess. Senator Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that recess. Mr. Chair, after speaking to the author of the bill, the amendment, and recognizing and I'm in support of actually the amendment that she has, I'd like to be able to proffer what I consider to be a substantively technical amendment to the amendment. And that is to take that line, the last sentence in line A, in section A, where it says interest earned in the income tax refund efficient payment trust fund may be used to hire seasonal employees to assist with income tax processing. Actually make that subsection B and then subsequently change subsection B to subsection C.
Okay, so there's an amendment to the amendment to take the last line of A, make that last line of A become B, and then make B become C, correct?
Yes, sir.
Any discussion on this amendment to the amendment? Any objection to this amendment to the amendment? No objection, motion carries. We're back on the original amendment. Anyone else on Speaker Talahi's amendment? Seeing no one on Speaker Talahi's amendment, Speaker, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think I need to close on that amendment, but if you could recognize me afterward, I'd like to bookmark Section 6 and 7 and the corresponding tally page on page 3. It's Roman numeral 1A, taxes. Just bookmark that despite the rules of engagement so we can come back later if we need to adjust the provision for tax refunds.
Okay, Speaker, can you repeat that one more time so we can make sure that it's properly bookmarked?
It's page 3 of the bill, the subsection, or subsection A, taxes, and page 6, section 6 and section 7.
Mr. Chair, do we dispose of first off the amendment because that seems to be a motion?
Thank you. Actually, that's correct. Madam Speaker, if we can first dispense with the original amendment, then I will recognize you for the bookmark.
Sure, just, please, no need to close on that amendment. Yeah.
Any objections on the amendment? No objections, motion carries. Madam Speaker, you're recognized.
I'd like to move, notwithstanding the rules of engagement, to bookmark the provision for tax refunds on page 3. It's on Section A of Chapter 1, Roman numeral 1, and Section 6 and 7 of this chapter as well, for the provision of refund in case we need to amend that. Thank you.
There has been a motion. Any objection to the motion? Seeing no objections, motion carries. We are now on an amendment proffered by Senator Nelson. It's SB 55 TCN to line 15, page 9. Line 15, page 9.
This is number 12 on the Google Drive for the amendments listing. Mr. Chair, this is a very simple amendment. If we go into the substituted bill, we will see on page 9 that in section 7 that $93.5 million have come in reimbursements to fulfill the CTC and ACTC. And 10% of those reimbursements, which is $9.35 million, is going to aside for DRT. And this is hopefully what they would use this for would be to improve their operations. I understand that there's a reorganization in the foresight, and I want to ensure that we secure the entire amount of $9.35 million, which is the 10%. And so instead of it saying no more than 10%, I put no less than 10% to ensure that they receive the full 10%. That is all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Anyone on this amendment? Would anyone like to speak on the amendment proffered by Senator Nelson? Madam Speaker, you're recognized.
I'd just like to make a point that we had asked for Department of Revenue and Taxation to provide us a copy of the agreement that she had made with the, I don't remember if it's Treasury or the IRS regarding the child tax credit reimbursements. I'd still like to see a copy of that because I think that would also inform us how they treated this 10% in that agreement.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Anyone else on the Nelson amendment? No one else? Senator Perez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. As the proffer of the amendment stated, that they are in dire need of personnel to help carry out a lot of the mandates that they currently have, in addition to a lot of the local mandates that have increased dramatically. So I rise in full support.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Anyone else on the Nelson amendment? If not, Senator Nelson, you may close. Any objections to the motion proffered by Senator Nelson? Seeing no objections, motion carries. We are now on an amendment by Senator Perez to line 21, page 9. Line 21, page 9, an amendment by Senator Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment basically would require a reporting requirement, quarterly reporting requirement on how Department of Revenue Taxation is utilizing the 10% of the money. And again, we want to ensure that they are following, at least providing some information in regards to their hiring, which is really needed at this time, in addition to the supplies that would go along with supporting the staff. So I ask for my colleagues' support on this.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Anyone on the Perez amendment? Again, this is an amendment to line 21, page 9. It adds, Senator Torres?
If the proffer of the amendment was so yield, is it correct that the only change to this subsection B is to require a quarterly report?
Senator Perez, do you yield to the question?
Yes, I do. Actually, I have another amendment, but I wanted to take this portion first, the reporting requirement first, before I go into the other amendment.
Senator Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think I have to share the same concern with the good lady from Santa Rita that I don't know whether that language is actually germane to the chapter. Because the cow jumped over the moon. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
My
Senator Blas, sorry. Please proceed.
My concern here, Mr. Chair, is in that language, the Department of Revenue Taxation in collaboration with the Department of Administration shall report quarterly to Legislature in Guam on how funds were expended. I don't know if it's germane to this chapter. So I don't have a problem with it, it's just that it may not be the same, this may not be the proper place for it.
Sorry, were you posing a question?
Is this the proper chapter? Is this the proper place for that language? In this portion of the bill, or in this chapter?
Point of information, Mr. Chair?
Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Yeah, so the point of this amendment was to ensure that this 10%, which we all know is to be $9.345 million, is being utilized in the manner as stated in this section. So I believe it is germane to the reporting of the usage of this particular part of the funds.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any dispute that is relevant to but I don't know whether that language is best suited here or should be here as opposed to best suited in the miscellaneous section of the bill. Because this is a reporting requirement, this is not a revenue. I don't object to the language, I just don't think it's proper in this portion here. So please don't register my thing as an objection to it, it's just that I don't know whether this is the right place for it.
Would you like for us to confer with legal?
Sure, please.
Moment's recess. Okay, after discussing with legal, it is legal's interpretation that this language works and it still works in this section. Would still have the same effect.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, again, this is not I am not opposing the amendment. Just for the sake of clarity and everything, that whether there was concern as to whether or not this was the proper place for it. Again, I'm not opposing the amendment, okay? So there's no opposition.
Okay, thank you, Senator Blas. Anyone else on the Perez Amendment? No one else on the Perez Amendment? Senator Perez, you may close. Any objections to the amendment? No objections, motion carries. Senator Perez has another amendment. That's the next amendment. However, I understand it is being replaced by a newer version of the amendment. So if you could give us a few minutes for the clerks to upload the replaced version of the Perez amendment. Her amendment will be to, well, I'll wait until they replace it. Okay, colleagues, the amendment has been loaded. Please refresh your Google Drives and look for the Perez Amendment to L17 through 18 P9. That's an amendment to lines 17 through 18 on page 9, proffered by Senator Perez. Senator Perez, you're recognized.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So there probably has to be some technical corrections because there was a previous amendment that passed, which was no less than 10%. The rest of the amendment reads, of all of the CTC, advance and regular, and ACTC received by the government of Guam shall be deposited in the general fund, and such funds shall be expended for personnel, overtime, equipment, supplies, training. I'm not sure of janitorial services. Maybe that could be accomplished by the regular budget, so maybe I'll just scratch that one off, but definitely automation services and training for the Department of Revenue and Taxation, Taxpayer Services Division, Tax Enforcement Division, Real Property Tax Division, Director's Office, Regulatory Division, and the Motor Vehicle Division for the driver's license and vehicle registration services. So I guess the only things that I would change here, I would just scratch off the janitorial services, being that the regular budget should be able to cover that. I wanted to include automation services. My understanding is that BSP has hired Ernst & Young to do an assessment of their internal workings. That includes automation, which can definitely assist with streamlining the agency to better accomplish all of their mandates, federal and local mandates. Again, in speaking with, I would like to also highlight the letter that was sent to us by Director Daphne Shimizu. encouraging the body to support, continued support of her agency. As you know, she was here during the Committee of the Whole, speaking of how, many of their workers are working 6 days a week. They're on the verge of burnout. They need to hire more staff. She made the analogy of, skydiving. If you ever go skydiving, you can't go above a certain level, otherwise you die. And I think they're at a point where they're really maximizing the resources that they have now. And considering a lot of these federal programs have come unabated, in addition to all the mandates that we put on them, I think it's really important to support them. And I think also they're at a critical time because there are assessments being done that can help create this foundation to create a more operational, streamlined agency that can help close many of the gaps in collections, that can help support the rest of our island and the government. So at this time, I would like to, this is the purpose of proffering this amendment, to provide the resources that DRT desperately needs at this very critical time. And just to share some of the, the everyday problems that these workers are experiencing. Their printers have gone down. They've had to suffer with a lack of paper and cartridges. They're lining up to get their printouts. And, the situation, whatever problems they're experiencing operationally, it goes out into affecting the customer service and, whatever we can do to support them in that end. The other thing that was mentioned, I know, was the janitorial services. They wrote out janitors for a couple months, even during the pandemic, over flooding of the bathrooms and also the problems with the leaks in the roof. A lot of the staff have to deal with moving things around to ensure that their equipment is safe from being wet. And so, a lot of this has, they're basically directed away from the work that they need to do to cover the gaps in whether it's the building or the equipment that they lack. There was also a time when their budget was used to purchase computers, and it was directed to another agency. And many of them are still using the old Windows version of Vista. We really need to invest in this agency. All these issues that we're experiencing in customer service can all come down to the proper equipment, the proper processes, and I believe that they're working on it. And as you can see in the letter from Director Shimizu, they are on the process of improving through more automation. There's more filings online, 1040 income tax, as well as business privilege taxes online, which can also be improved. The more that we can support them in that efforts, the greater we can achieve a lot more outcomes, positive outcomes for our community. And they are doing this. They've increased their income tax processing greatly, but whatever we can do to support that can support our community. So I ask for my colleagues' support on this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Any discussion on the Perez amendment? Speaker Talahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment to allow additional uses of some of this money that Department of Revenue and Tax might be receiving. They have indicated to us throughout the year the progress that they have made in allowing for 1040 filings online, and that they've also incorporated our mandate to accept gross receipts filings online, and that's because they've continued to tell us that the more online filing that they can get, the faster that these refunds can be processed. And so if we can even more expand our online tax return filings, they will be able to process them quicker. And so I'm in full support of that. their needs for technology, and I know I think they contract out some of these in order to get their ID, their driver's license and IDs system online for renewals. They contracted that out. I support whatever they have to do to get this technology in place. We've learned from the pandemic that this is the way to go, and we have to go this way. And and we've seen that the online filings has made them very efficient. They are able to take now 1040s, filed online, process them in a shorter amount of time, and then put refunds directly into direct deposit into a bank account. So I just think we've seen a lot of improvement. You know, I think a lot of it has to do with the director and the staff at the Department of Revenue and Taxation, that they've been really they've been tasked throughout this pandemic with several additional programs in addition to the ones that they normally do. And they've not complained, they've just stepped up and done it and completed it and put out those EAP payments to the people of Guam and all the other, you know, programs that we've assigned over there. So, and we're assigning them, I think, because we know they are very efficient. So it builds on itself, and we want to continue to be able to do this. So I think the more that we can give them so that they can increase the capacity for 1040 or online income tax filings, the faster they will process these filings, the faster these people will get their refunds, and then the more that these employees will be able to do things that they've put aside for maybe a while now and get back to that. For example, tax collections or other, you know, customer service issues that they need to address. So I think it's a win-win for us, and I support the expansion of what this money can be used for. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Anyone else on the Perez Amendment? Anyone else on the Perez Amendment? If not, Senator Perez, you may close.
No need to close, I think.
Okay. Any objections to the motion? No objections, motion carries. We are now on an amendment by Senator Nelson to line 4 through 25 of page 12. It should be number 17 in your Google Drive.
Mr. Chair, I think that's the next chapter of the bill. And before we go there, if I could ask a question on chapter 1.
I apologize. I stand corrected. I didn't realize this is actually to the second chapter, so we are done now with chapter 1. There's no other amendments to chapter 1. Speaker, you're recognized.
Yes, I'd like to just ask one question of OB, if I may. So if we look on page 11, there is the bond financing, of course, for JFK. And when we had come in last year to refinance the JFK bond, I don't remember the bill number or the law number that was, but we refinanced this JFK. And at that time, okay, just if I could take a 30-second recess, Mr. Chair, please.
30-second recess. Okay, we are back from recess. Speaker Terlahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we move on to the next chapter, the ending of Chapter 1 talks about our bond obligations and how much we're paying for each of them. And several of these are significantly less than last year in our FY21 budget because of the refinancing that we did this year on several of these. And I just wanted to follow up on one in particular, and that was the, we authorized by Bill number 40-36 during this term a refinancing of the BPT refunding bonds, Series 2015D. And when we did that, the savings was supposed to be, 39 million. 5 million in FY21, 19.9 in FY22, 13.1 million in FY23. So apparently we're saving about 19.9 million in this FY2022 on these bond payments. But when we refinanced this, one of the provisions that I added to the bill at that time was that it says, of course, that principal and interest on the bonds issued shall be subject to appropriation. Sorry, it says all revenues are hereby appropriated for the purposes of paying the principal and interest on the bonds. Revenues released from the lien shall be subject to appropriation. And then it says, this is the part that I had added, was up to $5 million of said revenues shall be appropriated to the Department of Public Health and Social Services in FY21 and FY22 for the sole purpose of providing temporary assistance in the form of grants, which shall be distributed to local nonprofit organizations that provide food and commodities for homeless individuals, unemployed individuals, children, and low-income families. These funds shall not lapse and shall be available to DPHSS until fully expended, provided that this appropriation of revenues shall not take effect if federal funds, to include funds from the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, are expended for substantially similar purposes stated in this subsection by the end of FY 2021. So I just wanted to follow up with OFB if they have any indication of whether any of the savings from this refinancing, as we had discussed when we were authorizing the refinancing, any of that $5 million of savings had gone towards these purposes, which is to temporary assistance in the form of grants distributed to nonprofit organizations that provide food and commodities for homeless, low-income families, children, unemployed, and other individuals. Do you have any records of any of this savings going towards public health for those purposes? We had talked at the time about how public health is in charge of the Ali shelters. They contract with Catholic Social Services for a lot of these provisions, and food is always a necessity. Even when we were talking back then, I think right now it's still very, very clear. So I just wanted to find out if you were able to track any of this.
Senator, are you referring to the savings from the JFK bond?
No, from the BPT.
From the BBT. Yeah, I am not aware of any savings or any funds as a result of the refinancing for those bonds going to departments and agencies. I was told that the portion for the refinancing, I believe, of JFK went back to GDOE.
Say that again? Oh, the savings from JFK went to GDOE?
Yes, that was my understanding.
Well, are you able to track that? How did it go back there?
That, Senator, we were trying to inquire with that with Department of Administration, because the same token, GVBs also do a reimbursement from the refinancing of the hot bond. And from my information from GVB, they have yet to date been in receipt of any type of savings as a result of that refinancing.
Right, well, I'm just curious, well, now that you mentioned the JFK, whether that, if that's unappropriated funds then to them, that they are able to expend, and how, for what purposes. However, I don't remember that being discussed. But this one, very clearly, the savings on the BPT was supposed to go at least 5 million towards these purposes. And so I want to know, how do we, if this is, you know, if they followed this when they made these promises to us when we were agreeing to refinance.
Again, Senator, once the refinancing is done, that's really up to the administration to kind of follow through on how these funds basically are recorded and how they're supposed to be dispersed. Now, if these are unappropriated funds, then it is my opinion that it should come back to the legislature to be appropriated. But if it's considered a savings, then, you know, I need to find out whether or not that savings is a savings that is generated in the general fund and deposited into the general fund. And maybe at the end of the year, be part of the general fund balance.
Correct. Well, except that at this time, we had very specifically made appropriation language so that we didn't have to go back and do it. We did it in advance, and that would be appropriated 5 million. I guess I'm going to ask when we get to public health that 5 million be restored.
Absolutely, Senator. And like I said, if it's at the level of the Department of Administration, they're the ones that basically are supposed to account for this. And
Yes.
if it's an appropriation, it's supposed to be set aside for such purpose, yes.
All right, and so just, so you haven't seen, you aren't able to track that. You do not see that money going to public health, is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, I am concerned that when we make these provisions for bond refinancing, that all of them should be followed, and that the legislature's authority to refinance the bonds is given in, you know, good faith, because we are, you know, especially hoping that this food is going to get to these people. Mr. Chair, for that question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. All right, anyone else with any questions on Chapter 1 before we close the chapter? Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for OFB, and this is with regard to Section 6, Earned Income Tax Credit Reimbursements, that is on page 8 and 9. Mr. Guerrero, it appears on Section 6 that the bill intends to spend $35 million of the EITC reimbursements for a healthcare facility, and then another $5 million for a Department of Corrections facility. But I noticed that the language does not include specific appropriation language. It doesn't say, for example, the sum of $35 million is appropriated from the general fund. So I want to ask, and just note, if in your experience with BBMR and OFB, is the language in Section 6 sufficient enough for BBMR analysts to input this appropriation on an ASA 400 system to then be able to expend against it without appropriation language?
Senator, the way I would answer that is that since technically it's not being appropriated, it's just being kept in the reserve account in the general fund, they would have to account it somehow in the AS 400 as an entry as to accommodate the total general fund appropriation in the bill.
In looking at all the subsequent chapters, everything that is anticipated to be expended has appropriation language specifically.
That's correct.
And this does not. So do you really believe that this is sufficient for DOA or the executive branch to actually expend any funds that you have identified here, for example, for finance, design, construction, maintenance related expenses? Because without that, if it's truly just in the reserve, how are they able to gain the authority or to reference any authority to expend? I don't believe it's there. It's inconsistent with the entire Budget Act.
Like I mentioned, Senator, at this point, if, the, if these amounts that are reflected in the bill passes as part of the budget, I would assume right now that for BBMR to account for the entire 617 appropriation, they would have to account for that 40 million somewhere in the AS400 system. Now, whether or not it's a legal authority to spend the money, that I won't comment on at this point. But it is, the intent of the bill is to set aside those two amounts in the system.
So this language that's contained in here, such funds shall be expended, really is not true to form. I mean, what you're doing is you're creating a reserve account where there's no authority for anybody to actually expend it for the specific purposes that you mentioned here. And I just want to note that there is an inconsistency. So essentially, you're lockboxing this from anybody to expend it, notwithstanding your specific intent of how it's to be expended. So that's what I want to note, is that there is no actual appropriation language in here. So you're basically lockboxing $40 million for a said use, which has no mechanism to be used in that way.
The intent as written in the bill, Senator, is to set aside the amount of $40 million for those two projects. Now, whether or not it's going to be considered a lockbox, I don't know. The only thing I know is that when they do set it up in the system, they're going to have to set it up under a specific title with a proper account title, just to account for the funds. If they do not enter it into the AS400 system, they will not balance. So it has to be accounted somewhere in the system.
It's noted. So in essence, what I had just talked about, we are not in fact appropriating this money. We are locking it up, and there's no mechanism, which I guess is appropriate because there is no facility, there is no plan, there is nothing that is owed on it. There's no liability, notwithstanding how it's presented here, which it is what it is, actually.
You're correct, Senator.
Speaker Talai?
I'd just like to follow up on that questioning. I too am concerned that the language says we're taking $40 million from EITC reimbursements and we're going to deposit it into the general fund. I don't find that to be a lockbox. Even with our laws in place, we've seen just during this one budget session, so many of our laws making very specific direction for funds that those are not followed. And general fund, least of all. I can't see how this is going to protect this money by putting it into the general fund. And if you could just, that's $40 million from reimbursements that could be used for tax refunds. But we're locking it up, and I'm concerned as well that whether we really are ensuring its safety by saying this, just this. And secondly, I guess I want to just confirm, when you said the 600, you talked about this section and then you referenced the 617 million. This money, the 40 million, has nothing to do with the 617 million expenditures that we are making, does it? Because we're spending 617 million from the general fund. Is that including this or not including this? I thought it's not including this. This is taken off the top before we got to the 617.
You're correct, Senator. What I was referring to, the 617, was if the bill was passed at the level of 617 for the general fund, that 617 must be reflected somewhere in the AS400 in its totality. So if they don't, for example, put in 5 million for whatever programs, it will not balance. So that's what I was referring to. If we're going to account for the 40 million, it needs to be reflected somewhere that 40 million is still, I would say, use the word available. And the intent on the bill, as written in the bill, was that it's deposited into the general fund for specific use to be used later on down the line. That's my understanding of what the bill is trying to do.
Yes, well, I share the concerns of the previous speaker, and that depositing into the general fund without any restriction is really, I'm not sure the net effect of that and whether we're really truly protecting that money. Sitos Masi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Any more questions to Chapter 1? If there, Senator Nelson?
Just for clarification, Mr. Chair, we are bookmarking Chapter 1 as well, right? We're not closing Chapter 1.
Yeah, we'll close it with exception to the bookmark made by the speaker earlier.
Okay.
All right, any questions on Chapter 1 before we close it? Nope, Chapter 1 is closed. I asked twice. Oh. All right, we are now on Chapter 2, Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Nelson?
The amendment that we have, are you going back to me for the amendment for Chapter 2? I just wanted to ask
Go ahead.
that we do have an amendment. We're going to fix the accounting on the amendment, so if I could just bookmark Chapter 2, the GDOE, and then also the chapter on charter schools. And I don't have, and then my amendments will come after, just so we can move forward.
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time? I didn't. I apologize.
We have some amendments, but we need to fix some of the accounting and make confirm with the statute to ensure that what we want to do to place the money in the Healthy Futures Fund for GDOE and to try to find money for the charter schools through the general fund in the education section. We need to just verify with the statute. So I'd ask that we can bookmark education and the charter schools.
So you're making a motion notwithstanding, is that correct, to bookmark the entire Chapter 2?
Yes. No, not the entire Chapter 2. Just the section on charter schools and Guam Department of Education.
So you're asking for you're making a motion notwithstanding
Correct.
rules to bookmark DOE and charter school section,
Sections, yes.
correct?
Of Chapter 2.
Of Chapter 2. Are there any objections to the motion? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We'll take a moment's recess to ensure that all the amendments are properly loaded. Okay, we are back from recess. There are still some amendments that are being sorted out in this chapter, but right now we do have an amendment that is ready, and this is an amendment by Senator Nelson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, if you go to to Chapter 2 in the Google Drive, you'll find the file name SB55-TCN L21 P19 Committee of the Whole. So this is to add an amendment, and I would also at this time like to include Senator Chris Duenas on this amendment. And I'd like to thank him for his collaboration with us on ensuring that the bonuses, rewards, and incentives programs are accounted for. And so basically this is a line item in instructing that the general fund appropriation, that $1 million, which is owed to the faculty for their incentives program, has not been paid for several years. And so this $1 million is going to cover those that have performed and excelled beyond the standard requirement. And I think that this is long overdue, especially now as we are constantly trying to navigate through this pandemic and all these different types of restrictions that are put in place, or guidance that are put in place. I believe that this is something that this is a good faith forward to acknowledge the hard work that Guam Department of Education faculty and staff has done. And I would like to ensure that they receive their bonuses, rewards, and incentives, which is long overdue for several years. And so I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank you, colleagues, for your support.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Anyone on the Nelson Amendment? Senator Duenas, you're recognized.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Senator Nelson for including me as a co-sponsor of this amendment. And I want to thank her for listening, and she was aware of this issue, but I wanted to kind of bring about some of the reason why I also went to her again about this program. Several teachers had approached me who were disappointed when there was those left behind. And there are many emails and there are many representations made by the Guam Federation of Teachers to the Department of Education and the board over how this program that was basically frozen, if you will, really adversely affected those who were not compensated. All of the paperwork is in, Mr. Chairman. All of this is recognized. And what really got me was the teachers that came to sit down and talk to me said, you know, a lot of the reason why many teachers didn't leave the system, even when the pay was so much greater at Dodea and the like, was because, first of all, they love teaching in the Guam, in our public schools, and being Guam public school teachers. But it gave them that little added incentive to stay, because it was like, yeah, I may be able to get a $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 pay increase to go to Dodea, and I might be more comfortable there, and resources may be more readily available. But I want to stay in the in our Department of Education system. I want to teach our kids, that we care about so much that are in the system here on this side of the fence. And I couldn't imagine that that we wouldn't recognize that. And I'm glad that the superintendent, I wasn't able to attend all of it, but I know that the hearing that was held on their budget, when asked, he did recognize that this is something that has to be reconciled. I did not argue with it, and that basically with the authorization, they would get back on track and really make good on this program. It's the right thing to do, Mr. Chairman, and like I said, this program was paid out to certain teachers prior to the kind of the suspending of the program. This is a vetted program in terms of the merit. It is merit-based, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of the teachers that had approached me, were very passionate about it. And so, like I said, I just appreciate, Senator Nelson for saying, yeah, I'm aware of that, and saying that we're going to make it right in this budget. So with that, I support the amendment, and like I said, it's the right thing to do, and thank you to those teachers who didn't depart for greener pastures and decided to stay and continue to work on trying to educate our children to the best of their ability. Sujus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Anyone else on the Nelson Amendment? Would anyone else like to speak on this amendment? Speaker Terlahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, I am in full support of anything that's going to give additional compensation to teachers who have been asking that their pay be reviewed for many, many years now. So I'm in full support, but if I could ask a couple questions of the sponsor of this amendment. So it's $1 million pursuant to a certain program at DOE, the Bonuses, Rewards, and Incentives Program. This program looks to me like it was established either way before 2003 or else in 2003 at the very least, which is years. And I just want to find out, as a previous speaker said, that this was being paid, and then somehow they stopped paying. And so what happens, are the rules that were put in place back then still in place? Are all teachers going to be eligible for this, or is this 1 million only going to kind of make up some past payments for teachers who were already qualified for these bonuses? Or is this going to be used for all teachers to apply and hopefully be eligible for some of this money?
Does the sponsor yield to the question?
Can I get a quick recess, Mr. Chair? Just a minute.
Sure, a moment's recess. Okay, we're back from recess. Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion that we recess till tomorrow at 9 a.m., and then we can continue this discussion further. So I can
Right.
get adequate, concrete information.
There's a motion to recess until tomorrow at 9 a.m. Any objections? Seeing none, motion carries.